West Ham United are known for nothing much really. However, behind the curtains are some things that nobody knows. This is Team 5 of explaining the entire history of the Premier League. We're doing this with every single team, so if you want to see yours, make sure to subscribe. West Ham's story doesn't begin with the words West Ham United, but instead Thames Ironwork Football Club, which was founded in 1895. It was originally for ship workers within the shipbuilding company. This was until 1900 when it was rebranded to West Ham United. It wasn't until 1919 when they entered the Football League, joining the second division after World War I. After a couple seasons of building, they were promoted to the first division in 1923. After going back down a few years later, the 30s consisted of remaining steady within the second division. They never really posed a serious threat to any elite team, nor were they a much threat of relegation. Instead, they slowly built a reputation as a competitive and hard-working side. Like many clubs, West Ham were heavily hit during World War II. Players and finances were affected by the war, and a rebuild was needed. The 40s and 50s was a transition period for the club as they continued to build. They hired Ted Fenton in 1951, who had a vision of making a training facility to grow and improve a set of younger players. This became known as the Youth Academy, as West Ham became one of the first in the world to do so. This academy planted the seed to what many fans call the Golden Era. Fenton managed to get West Ham promoted in 1958, and after he left, he was replaced by Ron Greenwood, beginning the Ron Greenwood era. Greenwood brought a modern style of football to West Ham, specialising in attractive passing football. He committed to utilising the Youth Academy and youth players. It was a huge risk, but it paid off as they won their first FA Cup in 1964, as well as the European Cup Winners' Cup the following year. With star players like Bobby Moore, Geoff Hurst and Martin Peters, West Ham rose to be one of the strongest sides in Europe. They were praised for their homegrown talents and agile style of play. However, what was to happen next would put an end to their glory years and change West Ham United forever. Greenwood left his position as manager to work as a board director, which began a transition period for West Ham. Assistant manager John Lyall was appointed as manager, which actually became a massive hit. He managed to guide them to the FA Cup final and win it, as well as finishing runners-up in the European Cup Winners' Cup again. They weren't as fortunate in the league, however, as their struggling form led to them being relegated for the first time in over 15 years. This didn't stop them, however, as whilst in the second division, they managed to win the FA Cup in 1980, beating Arsenal in the final. This was a huge achievement, and still no other second division team has done this since. They bounced back in 1981, gaining promotion back to the first division, where they were to finish within the top half of the table for 3 seasons in a row. Lyall even guided this West Ham team to 3rd place, their highest ever finish in 1986. This didn't last long, however, and after going back down to the second division again in 1989, John Lyall was sacked. The 90s consisted of a lot of back and forth between the first and second division, and it wasn't until 1994 where they remained stable. It wasn't going to be easy, however under Harry Redknapp, they managed to stabilise and impressively finish 5th in 2000. It looked like they had climbed back up the ranks and were finally back near the top. They even won the UEFA Intertoto Cup the next season. Throughout this time, Redknapp made statement signings like Paulo Di Canio, Ian Wright, Stuart Pearce and more, alongside youth talents like Rio Ferdinand. They had a strong side to compete. However, after Ferdinand's departure in 2000, as well as players beginning to age, things began to fall apart for Harry Redknapp. He made multiple failed signings, and after a sharp decline, he was sacked as manager. The club scrambled for a replacement, which briefly worked until they found themselves relegated, despite having 43 points in 2003. Big players like Defoe, Di Canio and Michael Carrick all left. West Ham were left to try and rebuild and go again. After a season away, they came back with a bang, finishing 9th and reaching the FA Cup final, losing on penalties. This was a historic achievement and qualified them for Europe once again. After signing players like Carlos Tevez and Mascherano, they brought a brief stability within the Prem. However, financial troubles led them to be fighting relegation again and not really being able to pose any sort of threat. The 2010s for West Ham were pretty boring, to be honest. After going up and down at the start of the decade, they remained of a sort of mid-table club for the rest of the decade, cementing themselves as a mid-table club with Premier League security. The highlight for this decade was moving to the London Stadium in 2016. This was a huge statement for West Ham and set the mark for the future of the club. They had a strong 2021 season, qualifying for the Europa League, where they managed to make their way all the way to the semi-finals before being heartbroken by eventual winners Frankfurt. They had to bounce back from this tough defeat. They had a strong 2022 season, finishing 7th, qualifying for the second ever Europa Conference League, with key players like Jared Bowen, Declan Rice and Antonio. This wasn't just going to be a thing to try and fail. They genuinely stood a chance of European glory at last. They breezed through the groups, winning all their games as well as the round of 16s and the quarterfinals. They faced their first real threat in the form of AZ Alkmaar in the semis. Unlike last time, they weren't wanting to exit now. They won the first leg before a stunner from Fornals sealed their place in a European final. This was their chance at a trophy for the first time in decades. They came up against Italian giants Fiorentina. It wasn't going to be easy, and that was evident as the game remained in a 1-1 stalemate, with neither side able to find a goal. But then, in the 90th minute of the game, there was a chance. They had done it. West Ham lifted their first trophy in 40 years and their first European trophy in 80 years. History had been made, and despite their slight drop off recently, this win still remains and will remain as one of the most iconic moments in West Ham's history. So the question now stands, how will they do this season? While you think about that, why not watch this video right here?